welcome to another episode of Daddy Issues. Today we just decided we're going to kind of go off any one topic and just talk fathering or dadding in general. So if it sucks, blame Don.
We're going to wing it today. So I'm one of your hosts. I'm Don Tretler. I'm Fatherhood Services Coordinator with Early Education Services. And this is my co-host.
I'm Craig Jakes, and back to you.
And Craig's a big Seattle Seahawks fan, which he announced to me partway through the season last year. So he's not just jumping on the bandwagon after they won. He kind of told me in October that he was a big Seahawks fan.
Yeah, I've been a Seahawks fan. Well, my dad's a Seahawks fan, and I was raised one, so the only football I heard from the womb would have been the Seahawks, which meant one game a year at that point, because this is definitely Patriots area.
Right, and national television isn't going to tend to carry a lot of Seahawks games.
Especially when, you figure they started in 76, so, the first few years they definitely weren't carrying them because, well, until the last few years they didn't want to carry them because who wanted to watch it, to be honest, other than diehard 12th man.
Right. So how did your dad turn out to be a Seahawks fan?
I believe he told me the story about he had a different team that he had followed, but the owner at the time turned out to be kind of a jerk, and he was doing some shady things, and he's like, I'm done. And he couldn't bring himself to be a Patriots fan, even though he was a Vermont-born guy. He's just like, I just don't like them. And the Seahawks, the first year, 76, he was like, I'll give these guys a shot. And after a few years of that, you know how it is. You follow a team, even if they're in the dumps. I mean, you follow them.
Do I know?
Yeah, you're a Mets fan.
I'm a huge New York Met fan, so yeah, I follow them, through thick or thin.
What are they going to do? You know how they have interleague play in baseball and in football. When are they going to do, inter, sport play? I'd love to see the Seahawks and the Mets play basketball.
You know what they used to do? They don't do this anymore, but they used to have a television show on ABC. I think it used to come on during the weekends. It was called Superstars. I think it was called Superstars. And they would have all these athletes from different sports. I mean, it could be track and field, swimmers, soccer players, baseball players, football players, and they used to compete. And they used to have to go through obstacle courses and do a bunch of stuff. And then they used to have the World Series champion take on the Super Bowl champion. I wonder if this is on YouTube.
Oh, no. We're on TV. You can't say the word Super Bowl. That is something that can get you in trouble. It's the big game.
The big game. Can't get me in trouble. Just try.
Well, there's a new commercial that has Russell Wilson, the Seahawks quarterback, in it for the Surface, and he couldn't even refer to it. He said, I've been trying to keep busy since the big game, like even in the commercial starring the quarterback who, I mean, let's be honest, that was a ridiculous Super Bowl. I expected them to win. They were on such a good roll, but that, even as a diehard 12th man, I did not see that coming. I mean, basically, if your name was Manning, the Seahawks were just going to mess you up this year. That's what happened. I mean, when they played New York, they just killed them.
They messed them up?
And in New Jersey, because I don't care what you want to say, New York plays in New Jersey, they left them scoreless at home, which is, almost
awful.
Impossible. And then, I mean, when you're at home, you don't usually end up scoreless. You just don't. And then, in the Super Bowl, took on his brother, and, well, I'm sure you saw some of that. But I'm not sure why the sports talk so much, but
maybe we're just talking about how your dad became a fan, and I think about how I became a Met fan because my father was a Met fan, and my dad became a Met fan because originally he was a Brooklyn Dodger fan. His family came from Brooklyn. And then the Dodgers, if you don't know anything about baseball history, right? The Dodgers moved out in 1957. They moved out to Los Angeles. So he was left without a team. I think a lot of New York National League fans, because within a year or so, the Giants moved out to the West Coast as well. So both New York National League teams, vacated. It took about 5 years, and then they created the Mets in 1962 to kind of fill the National League baseball void. And so a lot of those National League fans, Brooklyn Dodger fans, Giant fans, all became Met fans. And they took the colors. They took the royal blue from the Dodgers, and then they took the orange NY from the Giants and stuff. So,
Well, and it's funny, as much as, people talk about, the Red Sox, Yankees hating each other, the Mets and Yankees are actually worse, I think, at times. Fans of either team, it's like if you're a Yankee fan, you'd almost rather have a conversation with a Boston Red Sox fan than a Mets fan. You know what I mean?
Oh yeah, it's when you live in New York, Yankee fans have this. They've won 27 World Series, right? So they kind of have this attitude that they look down on some of the other teams that don't have as many championships under their belt. Of course, they neglect to identify history and the fact that the Yankees used to use other teams as their minor league development facilities. So,
Well, since we're on the subject of sports, something that we talked about at one point, I think, on our podcast version of this show, I thought maybe this just popped into my head. We can talk about the whole thing with kids sports and the tendency to give everybody a trophy. You were here, instead of, this was the MVP for the team, or this was the MVP for the game. Personally, I think it's detrimental to kids. I think there's so much that kids can learn from playing sports, especially football. I mean, it's such a rigid, you need to do what the coach says and you need to do it when he says kind of game. It's not, there's not room for a lot of leeway, or you're going to be running laps. So I think that, like, for me, anytime they said, oh, everyone gets a blue ribbon because you were here, those never meant anything to me. I'd throw those away. It's like, okay, yeah, I was there too. But if you earn a trophy or a ribbon or a plaque or whatever, I think honestly that means more. And I don't really think it hurts the self-esteem of the kids as much as people seem to think it does. Plus, I don't think self-esteem means as much in the real world, personally. So I was thinking we could kind of touch on some of those subjects since we're talking about sporting anyway.
Sure. Do your kids play any sports?
My son Joey played last summer. He played soccer. My son Jason, not really. He was taking karate for a while, but no team sports. Karate's not really much for teamwork as much as it's self-discipline, which he needs.
My son's been through a bunch of sports now. He played a couple seasons of baseball. He played a couple seasons of football. Played a couple seasons of hockey. He just did a season of wrestling. So he's trying on a bunch of hats, seeing what fits, seeing what works best for him. So yeah.
Well, I didn't end up following through with it, but when I was in when I was in middle school in Brattleboro, in 7th grade, I'm about 6'1.5", 6'2", something like that. Tall people don't really know the exact thing. I think the only people that know their exact height are short people. It's like, I'm 5'2"3/8". It's like, okay, pipe down, stretch. Like, really? But,
Short people, they got no reason to live.
Oh, jeez.
Got little ears and little eyes.
Yeah, my stepmother doesn't like that song. I don't know why. Anyway, but the point that I was making is I've been tall since about 7th grade. I've been, about this height, and I've always been stocky. I'm heavier now than I think I've ever been, but...
Is that the word for it, stocky?
Well, it's the polite word that means fat. I'm not stupid when people say I'm stocky. I mean, let's be honest. Husky. Yeah, I know I'm a porker. Why don't you name my pants after an Alaskan sled dog?
Burly.
Burly? That almost sounds like it has some anger in it, but anyway, I guess when I think of burly people, I I don't know. I think more anger involved.
Anger.
What
Burly
happened?
people
What happened
are
to the
angry.
jolly fat guy? You know?
The jolly fat guy.
Yeah, I'm a jolly fat guy.
Could you be a jolly skinny guy?
I could be. I like food too much. I mean, here's the thing with me. People look at me and they go, there's a guy who likes to eat and probably doesn't exercise that much. And you know what? Ding! They got it. That's me. But I'm not at the point yet where people go, what happened? So as long as I stay away from the what happened, I think I'm good. But anyway.
So you were in 7th grade.
Yes, and the football coach for the high school had walked up to me and said, as soon as you're in 9th grade, you come try out for my team. Like, just based solely on size. He's like, I can work with a kid that size, you know? I didn't follow through with it mainly because I was lazy.
Is that kind of a stereotype? It's like people did the same thing to me because I was tall as I was growing up, so they
Basketball?
would say, "Hey, you should play basketball."
Yeah. I think that there is a stereotype to that, you know? It's like being tall, broad-shouldered, and, you know, I think that definitely, you know, was why I know that's why he came up to me, and that's probably the same thing. But just because you're tall doesn't necessarily mean you know how to dribble, or just because I'm, you know, stocky and tall doesn't mean that I, you know, can throw a football. I can. I love playing catch. I've been teaching my stepson, Austin, how to throw a football and, you know, really do the spiral throw, and he's getting really good at it, actually. Between that and I've been showing him, you know, just playing catch with a baseball. It's a slightly smaller one because his hands are smaller, just to get him used to it. But I mean, I show him, you know, the way pitchers put their fingers on the threads, and I'm showing him how to do it right, you know. And I got him so he's not afraid to jump in front of the ball, you know. It's like, yes, sometimes it's going to bounce up and hit you, and, you know, don't worry about it. It won't really hurt as bad as you think it's going to, you know. And he's taken to it pretty well, actually. I really think that sports is definitely a good thing for kids, you know. Plus, it wears them out so that they go to bed on time. Not that I would suggest that you should wear out your kids so that you have an easier night, but I'm just saying sometimes you want that.
Right, right. And ideally, you know, if your kids play team sports, then, you know, they're going to, you know, learn the importance of working as a team, you know, with other individuals, and the joy that comes with that accomplishment of accomplishing a team goal, you know, like winning a championship as part of a team. A lot of times we play up. I know that, you know, we're both sports fans, and they tend to play up a lot of the individual accomplishments that the athletes have. You know, for a football player, you know, how many touchdowns did they get? How many receptions? How many rushing yards? Which kind of leaves out, you know, stuff for the offensive and defensive lines.
Which makes me wonder why more quote-unquote nerds don't watch sports, because the statistics, I mean, there's baseball, football, it's nothing but statistics for the fans. Are you kidding? That's why, you know, when I was in school, I was past the Dungeons and Dragons thing, but people were into Magic cards and stuff like that. And then, you know, it became really popular for the fantasy football, and I was like, oh, that's Dungeons and Dragons for jocks. It basically is. I mean, it's just as much fantasy and just as much nonsense, you know?
I once heard it said that it's Dungeons and Dragons, fantasy sports are Dungeons and Dragons for the guys who used to beat up the kids that did Dungeons and Dragons.
Yeah, I believe I said that to you at one point.
I don't know if that's true or not.
I believe it was me.
Because I don't think I love fantasy sports, but I don't think I ever beat up any kids that played Dungeons and Dragons.
Okay.
Nor did I play Dungeons and Dragons.
Yeah, I was
Today
never
our
into
subject
that.
is Dungeons and Dragons. Are you a dungeon or a dragon? I'm a dungeon man myself.
Does that just mean you like, never mind, I'm not going to make that joke because
He was
this is
going
a
there.
family show.
He was going there. We're
No,
a
I'm
dad
not.
show, and
It's, you know, I want it to be able to be viewed as a family.
viewed by children.
Yeah, I mean, it would be boring for children, but that's mostly you.
So, so we're talking about, got into the area of sports and, accomplishment with kids. And I think sometimes, one of the big pushes right now is to make sure that children stay away from childhood obesity. And one of the ways that we could keep them from being obese is to get them out and exercising, and part of that is, some of the organized sports. If we can get our kids involved in sports, then they're going to be more apt to go out there, like you say, get exercise, get tired out, and they're going to sleep a little bit better. But there's also a push on the other side, and I don't think we see it quite so much up here as they do in suburbia, but there's a push for competitiveness too. And I think some of that push for competitiveness kind of pushes some of the kids that are not planning on being professional athletes. It kind of pushes them out of the game.
And yeah, there's a lot of parents that go too far too.
Yeah, it's not enjoyable to be yelled at by your coach when you're a kid. If you had a choice, you'd be like, you know what, I'd rather go home and play my video games, or at least, I'm not going to be screamed at by some adult guy telling me I'm not doing what I'm supposed to be doing or whatever.
But I think even the yelling can teach you life lessons about the real world too, It's like but there's a limit. Obviously you don't want someone in your kid's face swearing up a storm, but on the other hand, a little yelling for motivation, I've worked plenty of jobs where bosses thought yelling for motivation was just par for the course.
Well, military school might come into play there. You could send your kid there, and some people, when you say that, it sounds like, oh my word, that's, you're torturing your child, but, there you would learn some discipline.
What's the guy's name from Full Metal Jacket? I was just picturing that.
You're picturing the drill instructor?
Army? Is that his name?
R. Lee Ermey.
R. Lee Ermey. Yeah.
Oh yeah. Gunnery Sergeant.
He'd be a great football coach.
My name is Gunnery Sergeant Hartman. From now on, you will speak only when spoken to, and the first and last words out of your filthy sewers will be, sir. Do you maggots understand? Sir, yes, sir. Baloney, sound off like you got something.
Something.
All right, I have to stop now.
Because you could actually quote it right, which is not necessarily arable. Unless this isn't HBO.
It is not. R. Lee Ermey, the reason why he was so effective and so memorable.
He really was.
He was a real Marine drill instructor.
Absolutely. So he knew. Well, originally, I believe he was on the set as, someone to just advise on how they should behave. And the guy that they had was doing so lousy a job that he's like, they basically went, well, why don't you just do it? All right. The best part, he just holds out his hand and he's like, choke yourself. And like, now, you don't want that in a football coach, but I think that he'd probably have a pretty structured team.
Well, it might give our children some discipline, teach our little children discipline, For instance, I'll give you, here's a little, like Marine Corps discipline thing, is that you don't wear your hats indoors. So it's considered unmanly.
Yeah, well, or just, could offend people.
So.
Yeah. Well, some people don't want to shine on the camera like you.
This is the way
This prevents me from doing the same thing. I don't have all my hair under there. My hair's running away from my face.
Right.
So, but
but it's the same thing. We could teach them those type of lessons, but people kind of shy away from having our kids, getting that much. I was going to say discipline, but there's probably another way to look at that. Structure, discipline.
Structure is a good way too, because it's, well, and you learn how to work with other people because, especially like football, it's all about working together. Yeah, there's some people that want to act like they're the star, but if you're really playing football for real, you don't get to just be the star. Like, without a team around you, with going back to the Super Bowl, it's like, Manning showed up, but I guess he forgot to bring the rest of the team because, well, again, you saw what happened. It's like, it wasn't so much that he was doing horribly, it's that, he had no one there backing him up, So, I mean, the Seahawks just walked up one side of them, down the other side of them, and kicked them on the way by,
Right.
you know?
Well, and like I said, I'm a humongous baseball fan, and some of the championship teams, and I think there's probably an exception to the rule, but for the most part, all the experiments where they tried to get all the stars that put up like tremendous statistics and they try to put them all together on one team, it doesn't work. And you think about some of the championship teams. Here we are, we're up in New England, so we could talk about the Boston Red Sox, who have won World Series 3 times in the past 10 years?
Well,
11?
since the new millennium, they've, been.
I know from the first one, it was not about a superstar team. A lot of those guys became well known after the World Series, but they have people. They had Kevin Millar, they had Bill Miller, they had I think Coco Crisp played for one of those teams. I can't think of his Pokey Reese. I mean, a lot of these guys that were not the big name stars, but they played roles. That was the first team. I'm trying to think what 2007 had some of those guys as well, and I'm sure. And last year's team was a bunch of guys. Johnny Gomes.
Well, and I'm more of a football guy, but I mean that what you're saying applies to the Seahawks too. It's like we had a second-year quarterback, between Russell Wilson. I believe it was the second year for Richard Sherman. I mean, yes, there was that big blow up about the way he reacted at the end of the game against the Niners that got him to the Super Bowl. But to be fair, as much as people gave him flack, and this isn't me just saying it because I'm a fan of the team, I'm looking at a 24-year-old who just made a play that helped them get to the Super Bowl. 24-year-old, all the adrenaline of a football game, add to it how important that game was. I don't know if someone was in my face talking bad about me for a whole game, that I wouldn't, with the adrenaline and all being hyped up like that I wouldn't say something too. I mean, I compare it more like to what Muhammad Ali used to say after every fight. He was always, "Look at me, I'm still pretty. They never touched me." It's basically the same shtick. You know what I mean?
Right. Well, for those folks out there that didn't get to experience Richard Sherman, why don't you do a little Richard Sherman for us?
I don't really do that impression. I do plenty of impressions. If you want to quote Beavis and Butthead, you let me know. But for right now, I don't know if I can help.
Oh, well, I mean, just thought you could. Well, so what did he say? What did he? I mean,
Well,
if you can't do the.
It was Michael Crabtree of the 49ers had been in his face talking bad the whole game or whatever, as smack talk happens in professional sports. And afterwards he was like, "I'm the best corner in the game. Don't put some sorry loser like Michael Crabtree up against me because this is what happens," And again, he had just helped the team get to the point where they were going. The next game was the Super Bowl, and he was full of adrenaline because you're gonna be anyway. Then add to the fact that he's 24 years old, and this was.
Right. Well, is adrenaline legal?
If it's natural, I think so. If you're adding it from some outside source, probably a little more iffy. But anyway, what I was going to say is, so one of the things that we had mentioned before on a podcast version of this show, we were talking about there was a team in Texas. It was a high school team that got sued by a parent of the opposing team because they basically just slaughtered them on the field. And they were like, "Well, you should have held back. You should have held back." So they were suing the team for bullying them because they didn't pull back and just crush them in the score. Except, come to find out, they had put in their second stringers and then their third stringers, and the score just kept racking up. But
what more could they do? Walk off the field?
Yeah, I mean, you don't want to, and with football, you don't want to have someone go out there and go halfway because you're going to get really hurt that way. If someone's coming at you full force and you go half at them because your team's winning, you're going to end up with injuries, just tons of them. So, but the fact that in 2013 is when it happened, a high school sports team could get sued because they won so by such a high margin that that would be considered bullying. Now, at some point, we do plan on talking about bullying in general, but just to touch on it a little bit, I mean, I think it's ridiculous to say, it's bullying because one team was obviously much better than another team.
Yeah, it sounds ridiculous.
I mean, that'd be like the Seahawks being accused of bullying the Denver Broncos.
I would bet that probably, the basis for this lawsuit, probably the person that's behind it is one of the parents was probably a lawyer, because otherwise they'd just be throwing their money away, even trying to, bring up a case like that. It's kind of ridiculous.
And probably the kind of parent that wants everyone to get a participation trophy. And, well, why should we make this person feel better about how they did? It's like, well, because this person did better,
Right.
Sorry, cord's all tangled.
So in a way, you're kind of saying that we need to up the pressure, that our kids need to learn to live under this pressure.
Well, not all the time, but they have to be able to deal with pressure, because when you're out in the real world, there's going to be pressure, and there's not going to be mom and dad, walking around telling your boss, well, be nice to my son. He's a very gentle person and he can't handle the stress of McDonald's or whatever. It's like, yeah, get over it. Like, that's not how the real world works. It's like, I'm a pick yourself up by the bootstraps guy. You know what I mean? It's like, you want to make good money, work for it. That's why I'm not a big, I'm not in favor of, higher minimum wage in a lot of instances, because I see a downside to it where it's like, people say, well, it's not a livable wage. Well, since when is flipping burgers at McDonald's supposed to be a livable wage? That is not supposed to be your end goal for a job. That's supposed to be, you're out of high school and you need a first job, or it's summer vacation and you need a job to have some extra spending money so you can take Betty Sue out to the movies. That's all that's for. It's not supposed to be a livable wage. If you have 4 kids, you probably shouldn't be working at McDonald's. Now, with the economic downturn, I do understand that some people were forced into that situation that didn't, but the people that really wanted to support their families, that was a temporary thing, and they were looking for something in their field while they were doing it.
Well, but Mike, the question that goes along with that is, if they're supposed to get another job, right? What other jobs should they get? Because what's happened is, and we're going to end up getting, I don't want to get too political with this, but
right.
What's happened is, if we've taken a lot of our manufacturing jobs and we've moved them outside of the country into third world countries because it's much cheaper, basically those jobs, the manufacturing jobs, have now been replaced with service jobs, which means working at McDonald's, working at Walmart. Those are the jobs that are available now. So I'm going to leave it that. We don't need to go off. But.
Yeah. Well, and I wasn't necessarily trying to get political. It was just, it's I was comparing it to the sports thing, where it's like, most of the time, if you have a job, there's usually some sort of ladder you can climb to do better in your job, and that's where you're going to earn the money, was basically my point.
Right.
And that doesn't have anything necessarily to do with if you're left wing, right wing, centrist, whatever your belief system is. That has to do with, if you work and show that you do good work, you should be in a job where you can then make more money. If they don't promote you that way, even though you're working really hard, then find somewhere that will. Obviously there's times when it's harder to find those jobs, but things are starting to turn around a little bit,
And this is where it kind of ties into fatherhood, that we want to bring our kids up to be a little bit grittier, a little bit more competitive,
Grit's a good word.
Hungrier,
Yep.
So in a way, maybe that's our tie-in there, is that we want our kids to be a little bit more competitive, so that in the future they're not going to be working at McDonald's. They're going to find a way. They're going to create some industries in this country so that people are going to be able to be employed. And a flip side of this too is that there are a lot of industries in the country that are skilled, that they can't even fill the jobs because they don't have the people that have the skills to fill the jobs. And I heard this about some of the technical industrial type of jobs. So
Well, and there's,
balance.
and
Fair and balanced.
a fire in the belly, will definitely help people get to the point where they can do those jobs, or as you said, grit. I like the word grit. That's perfect. The idea that you have to protect your kids from being told something's wrong or they didn't do so well does not help them have that fire in the belly or grit for when they, are out in the real world. It's like, I don't know. Like at my job, I don't really get a lot of people coming up and going, "Hey, really good job." I had that happen recently, and it definitely made me feel good, But it doesn't have to. I'm not saying it should happen every day or anything like that. But because it doesn't happen every day, that makes it feel real. It's like, "Hey, I noticed you did not only your work, but you came over." Someone that was in charge one night, I helped her out with some of the stuff that she had to do because I got done with my stuff early, and I went over and helped my supervisor, and she was very thankful. She said, "Thank you very much. I really appreciate that." And it felt good because I know that I did extra, I worked hard, and it was recognized by someone that was in a superior role to me in my job, But if it was, everyone was told, "You're doing a great job every day, no matter how things went," would that have meant anything to me? No.
Right. Well, Greg, you're winning me over here. You're waking me up. I think what I'm going to do is, from now on at my house, I think I'm going to make it like boot camp.
Well,
in the morning, get up, get out of your rack, you're moving, you're flying.
Well, see, I can be like that at times. My kids and my stepkids will say that, if they try to pull the wool over someone's eyes, it's my girlfriend, it's not me. They push a lot harder with her because they're like, "Well, there's 4 of us and he's asleep. So I think if we, tag team against her, we're going to get away with stuff because she's eventually going to get wore down from saying no and go, fine." They know that Dad don't play that game. He just doesn't. We were talking at the Coffee Connection, which we have to bring up now because we had started recording again. We have to definitely give a shout out to them before this show's over. So we will get back to that. But, we were talking about, things our kids would eat and what they wouldn't eat, for example, or things that, "Well, I don't want to wear that, I want to wear this." And I've always been fairly strict with that, where I've told my kids, and I got this from my dad, "You don't want to eat your dinner? Guess what breakfast is? Leftover spaghetti or whatever. You don't have to go back for seconds, but what I put on your first plate, you're going to eat." Now, there are some instances where things came up. My oldest turned out had a medical issue that caused him to have a gag reflex, and it wasn't about whether or not he liked the food. It was about other things, and there was a medical reason behind it. We found out when we worked on it, and now it's not an issue anymore. But he still has to eat whatever I serve him. It's just we had to deal with a medical issue first. But I just don't. There's certain things where I'm not going to let the kids decide. My number one answer when they ask me, "What's for dinner?" It's like, "Well, when you pay for dinner, you can decide the menu. Until then, this is not a restaurant. Dinner's what ends up on your plate when you eat."
And how many of us out there, that's the way that we were brought up. We were brought up with, you eat what's put in front of you, and then you don't leave the table until you're done eating. Or, even to a certain point, well, you don't get any dessert if you don't finish what you've eaten. Or even, giving it to you the next day, because wasting food, I know in my family, it was totally discouraged about wasting food. I know we'd hear about it. You ate everything. You were not supposed to leave anything on your plate to be thrown away.
Well, and, my 13-year-old, like I said, he has this thing where, he will push back on some things, but he's gotten in the rhythm now where even if he doesn't like a food that we're having for dinner, he won't even say a word about it. He'll just eat it. He won't go up for more. But I think that's good because now he's helping set the example to the other kids that it's like, and to be fair, my girlfriend and I do that too. She doesn't like any seafood at all, but we'll have fish sometimes and she will eat it because we want to show them that, hey, fish is healthy. We know that. It's something we want to have you get used to having in your diet. So even though she doesn't care for it, she will eat it to be a good, role model for the children. It's like, hey, I don't like it, but I'm eating it. And I think without her even having to state that to them, they see that. And that is a lesson that they're learning, to me, that's always the best way, is like set the example by doing, saying do this and then doing something different, a little harder.
Right.
But before we forget, you had some plugs that you want to do.
Oh yeah, we were going to do some plugs here to make sure that we don't forget about this.
So
Craig and I actually met at the parents group, which is called
Parks
Coffee
Place.
Connection at Parks Place. Happens at 8 o'clock on Thursday mornings.
Yep.
It's really convenient for me because right after I drop off my son at school, I can just head right over to Parks Place, and we meet up with other parents, discuss parenting issues.
And I work nights, but I just go over to the meeting before we come here, and then I'll go to bed after,
And probably 50% of the time we have actual coffee to drink.
Well, usually when Deb Whitkiss from Parks Place, who runs the meeting, is there, she's very diligent about trying to make some coffee. But then I show up with my Dunkin' Donuts or something, and my girlfriend does, and it's like, so she makes a pot of coffee, and then there's only a couple cups that get drank,
That's true.
So if anyone wants to join, like he said,
don't waste the coffee.
Yeah.
Come,
even if you just
coffee.
want free coffee and you want to hear other people talk about raising kids and coming up with things. We do some fun things in that group. Last year, as a group, we came up with doing. It was the second annual Parkapalooza at the park outside Central School, where there was a water balloon fight. There was people there grilling burgers. There was games to play. There was,
The fire department opened up one of the fire hydrants.
Absolutely. The help that we were given by the Bells Falls Police and the fire department.
We probably shouldn't talk about this. I haven't heard any mention of doing it again this year. Have you?
I haven't either, but
there may not be a Parkapalooza this year.
Oh no.
Unless there's a giant public outcry forcing us to have to put one together again.
Well, no, but the thing is, that's the type of thing we do. It's not a parenting group where we're sitting there and just complaining about issues necessarily. You can bring up issues that you have as a parent during the week, but Coffee Connection, we come up with things for the community to do. There's been community gardens that were being planted, and there's lots of, family things that, we come up with to do there. There was a commercial that you and I were the stars of. I'd say you were the star of. I was your sidekick. Talking about the effects of alcohol on teenagers' brains, And it's not that we were coming out saying no one should drink alcohol. We were just showing the downside of when your brain's developing, what can happen if you start drinking at an earlier age.
Right.
And it had a lot of facts. My job was to kind of mock you more than anything, but your job was to give some good information out. And, these are the types of things that we do through Coffee Connection.
Oh, I know what I was going to do. I couldn't remember what it was. We brought this up on an earlier program. I have this flyer up. We were talking about substances. Maybe it was last week that we were talking about bringing up
we definitely talked about
substance
drugs.
abuse with our kids. I've got this flyer up on my refrigerator, and it says, "Don't smoke weed. This bow tie don't lie." And it's a picture of a cat with a bow tie wearing like a little
Yeah, I believe you mentioned
laboratory smock. So yeah, the bow tie don't lie. Oh, I probably should put a plug in too that I run a fathers group.
Absolutely.
That takes place on Tuesdays, on the first and third Tuesdays of the month. We're up at the Springfield Savings and Loan. They've got a community room up there. So first and third Tuesdays of the month at 6 p.m. we meet up there. And the second and fourth Tuesdays at 6 p.m. we meet at Parks Place. So unfortunately, I'm sure Craig would be there if he could, but his hours don't coincide with that. But
no.
show up, come out there. I can't promise you coffee or anything like that, but if enough guys start showing up, maybe we could.
And what I like about it is, this show, like we said from episode 1, was about let's have dads show that they want to be involved. There's so many books and TV shows and everything about parenting that are directed towards the moms, and your fatherhood group that you were just plugging, it's about dads stepping up and being a parent.
Right.
It's like, because we get a bad rap in the press because there's so many deadbeat dads, and I'm not saying that doesn't exist. It's a huge problem. There's plenty of people that don't know their father just because they're not involved. But I like the idea that we're out here saying, please join us, do these things with us. You can learn better parenting skills. You can, whatever, like, just be involved in your kids' lives. You had read some facts about how important, a couple of weeks now, you've mentioned different facts about the positive effects or negative effects, whether your father's in your life or not. I know my parents got divorced when I was 1, but my father was always there for me. There was never a time where I felt like, even if I was at my mom's house, that my dad wasn't available, to be in my life.
And that was very important.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think I get a lot of my parenting style. Here's the best thing about having 2 separate houses. Not that that's the best way to do it, but I get to pick and choose between this is how my mom did it, this is how my dad did it. I think she was right about this. I think he was right about this. I get to pick from both, and that's how I get to parent,
Right.
But at least I have 2 options to choose from.
Exactly. Well, I brought something in this week that this isn't necessarily facts, but I thought this was kind of cool. I went to the New England Fathering Conference in Newport, Rhode Island in March, and one of the dads, I don't know what state. I want to say this man might have been from Rhode Island, but he had written this poem, and he read it to the whole conference, and it was so good that they had made copies. People wanted copies. I've brought it back. I've shared it with the fathers group down in Brattleboro. I've read it on the radio. Now I'm going to read it on television, and I hope I do a good job with this.
All right.
It's called "I Do Not Promise" by Luis Galindez Garcia. I do not promise to keep you, my children, from stumbling in life, nor to be next to you to assist you when you fall, lest my excessive protection hinder you and make you dependent. But I do promise to be there and to take care of your wounds. I do not promise you, my children, that I will hand down my experiences to you. You need your own experiences, in your own flesh. But I promise to be available when you request my advice. I do not promise you, my children, to solve all your problems, even though I would do anything for you. Solutions are more often in your own hands than in mine. But I promise to help you in any way possible when you need to vent. I do not promise you, my children, to prevent your suffering. I cannot blind you to reality. Sometimes suffering is necessary to learn to be strong, but I promise to offer my shoulder when you need comfort. I do not promise to give you, my children, everything you want, but I promise to give you what is necessary. I do not promise you, my children, that you will always be the center of my attention. I need to attend to other issues as well, both for your welfare and for that of the whole family. But I promise not to neglect you and to devote special time just for you. I do not promise you, my children, that I will be liked by you at all times. You may not like what I say or what I do. I have an obligation to lead you in the right way. But I promise not to humiliate you when I discipline you. Remember, my children, I do not promise to be by your side forever. I am mortal as any human being. But I promise to teach you that there is an eternal Father to whom you can turn at any time. I do not promise to be the perfect dad, but I promise to put all my love into the attempt. Again,
Wow.
this was written by Louis Galindez Garcia. I want to make sure that I
Said
give
people
him.
wanted copies. I want a copy. I like that.
Well, here you could take this one, but
all right.
and I wanted to add this to you, this for you because I thought this was pretty cool. I read it to my son, and my son said, "Oh, I thought that Craig wrote that."
Really?
He thought that that was something that you would have written.
There is a poem I wrote for my kids, and it's a lot longer than that. If I can find a copy of it, I will have no problem bringing it in. My kids haven't actually heard it yet. My thought process on it was, it's something that I want to leave to them after I am gone. But then I realized, I don't know if I would want to not be able to see how they take it in, you know? So if I find a copy, maybe I'll bring that and
Oh, that
share it
sounds
with
like.
you.
What do you think, people? Yay! Write in letters. Send in.
Speaking of what do you think, people, next plug. We have an email address that we would love for you guys to write us an email, give us a subject to discuss, because as you see, we're wandering all over the road this time.
Ask us questions about our fatherly expertise.
And by expertise, we mean I'm trying the best I can.
Yes,
And
exactly. I
he's a
feel the same way.
professional and he's doing the same thing, which
Professional father.
we have no handouts that we were given at the hospital that give us the exact path, but we're doing the best we can, you know?
Right.
Um,
And as Craig mentioned before, one of the main ways to learn how to be a father is to have a father.
oh, yeah.
You
yeah,
know, we watch a
absolutely.
father, and that's not to put down, to make sure that, you know, as dads, we're not going to put down, we're not here to put down mothers.
No.
You know, mothers are great. I love my mother. If you're out there, Mom, and you get to see this, I love you. But, you know, one of the things is how much a dad adds to a life. So I don't want to
Absolutely.
talk, we're not here to put down moms, but we're here to say how much a dad adds to a kid's life. And that
Absolutely.
is, what a big deal it really is. And I got to say, you know, I had my dad, you know, with me every, you know, on a daily basis. I got to see my dad, and sometimes not always in the positive, you know. But I learned how to be a dad from him, from watching him every day.
Absolutely.
And in the end, I had a lot of love. I have a lot of love for my father, and he did a lot of, you know, wonderful things and a lot of really nice things for me. So
But back to what I had started to say, we do have an email address.
we do have an email address which we didn't give out because Don interrupted.
It is, no, you had something to say, it's fine. But the email address is We Got Daddy Issues, WEGOTDADDYISSUES @yahoo.com. Please send us an email. Let us know what you think about the show. Comments, questions, complaints, whatever, you know,
Lay it on
subject
us.
matter to discuss. If you have a specific problem, I mean, we have no problem with, you know, reading your email. If you want to be kept, you know, anonymous, that's fine too. We'll, you know, however you want it done, but we're more than willing to tackle any subject, and, you know, I'm willing to hear any comment, pro or con, you know, so.
Are we too
definitely have to get that.
controversial?
Yeah.
Which is
So-
not why I try to clarify the whole mother thing. It's not about us being politically correct. It's to make the distinction that we're not as men, as fathers, we're not here to put down mothers. We're here to pump up fathers.
But I'm noticing the clock behind you on the monitor there. It says that it's getting towards the end here. So I think, you know, we've covered a few subjects today. I would say, you know, let's just be men about it. Sport's good for kids.
Good.
So until next week, I'm Craig Jakes.
I'm Don Tretler.
And wait till your father gets home.